Slideshow. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Hey team, thanks for joining. I know we're here just to kick off our new little book launch. This is our third book that we got to create in our series here. And fortunate enough to have my co-author of this book, John Morada, joining us. So just a brief agenda, what we're going to try to accomplish today. We're going to run through some introductions and background on the book in terms of why we put this content together. We'll give you a look on what the actual contents of the book entails, and then we'll get some sneak peek into some of the content as well and answer some questions. Are we ready to go? So the new book we published is How to Stand Up an M&A Function. I know it's a very niche topic, but I wanted to add some context on what inspired this book. A lot of you know I'm hosting the M&A Science podcast for about 7 years now. And in that experience, I got to talk to many different practitioners. But I noticed was oftentimes when an organization gets to that stage, when they set up an M&A function, there is no playbook. And a lot of these organizations will reach out and hire an experienced practitioner. They may hire somebody from a larger company where they're coming from a very mature M&A function. But when they're tasked to create one from scratch, there's still a lot to figure out. And we noticed a lot of these themes. And what we ended up doing was building a theme of interviews around understanding what goes into standing up an M&A function. And through these series of interviews, we realized there's a lot of different topics, a lot of different components, a lot of different unique challenges in terms of the culture of M&A within the organization and how that evolves. How do you build the muscles to be able to execute on diligence and integration? And we found it worthy enough to assemble this book to be able to compile a lot of these content and try to make it as comprehensive as you can, even though if we would have kept going with this project, it would have turned into a well over 400-page book. So we decided not to do that. We capped it around 200 pages, but to cover a lot of those core areas when it comes to standing up an M&A function. Now, this is from research we've done along the way to better understand what are the big challenges that M&A functions have in general, and to really start introducing these challenges early when one is approaching building out an M&A function, to be mindful of it and how do you adapt processes and plan ahead to overcome some of these challenges. A lot of this stuff is built around integration, that if teams don't plan early enough for integration, that's what ends up going to be becoming a big challenge and a bottleneck for down the road when you end up with an inefficient process, rediligencing a lot of components of the deal again, that leads to wasted time and resources. I think collaboration was a big one when we look at how teams are aligned and staying prioritized on the tasks and being able to work in a way that's very responsive to the things and changes that come about in a deal. As we know, when we start a deal process, we have very little information, but as it progresses, more and more information comes in. Those information identify opportunities to create value or risk that needs to be planned and how those risks are going to be mitigated. And then when we look at the activity and collaboration post-close, very similar, but it gets added. You have a lot more stakeholders involved, a lot more coordination that needs to happen. And aligning teams on highest priorities is even more critical and important. So we see that oftentimes when work streams are organized by these functions, they can be siloed off and it incurs a lot of these other challenges. So a lot of what we covered in the book that we published was around the process and structure. So not even getting to just the early phases of the right hires to make, but how do we really build a process to enable that level of collaboration and responsiveness to achieve those ideal results? I'll pause here. John, I'm going to have you chime in too, since you're heavily involved in architecting this book to make it more practical than theoretical. Maybe if you want to chat a little bit about the approach in terms of organizing some of the content together.
Yeah, thanks, Kison. Appreciate it. And welcome, audience. It was really great to see many of you. Well, a lot of the foundation of why we made the book practical is because right behind me, there are plenty of books that have this richness of institutional knowledge. But what we find is that the conversations then evolve beyond, well, what is it that structures a good M&A transaction into, well, how do you make it happen? And the pragmatism behind the how is what we've put into the book. We have plenty of wonderful contributors, from quotes to actual templates and processes that, excuse me, that have come not only from us, but have also come from many of the practitioners out there. And many well-known names are in the book as well. And those contributions are ones that we honor, because those are individuals that we have found to have some really great intellectual property around the way that you make a pragmatic approach to making integrations work, and how to make those integrations work really, really well. So before I dive into some of my favorite chapters, which I know is coming up here as a question, I do want to end with the idea that the way that the book is written is more about how you as a practitioner get the most out of it on a daily basis, not just being able to structure something, build it strategically, and then let it sit on the shelf over there. So with that being said, I'll head it back to Kison, but keep in mind that this book is about how to do things and how to do it on a daily basis.
I guess I
Thanks,
had a
Kison. Back to you.
follow question on that, John. How'd you go about the templates in the book? Because I know that was the one big thing I was harping about is, how do you make it quicker to get a sense of what this process should look like end to end? But what was your approach in terms of knowing what templates would make sense in the earlier stages, standing up an M&A function as opposed to over engineering it?
Hmm. A fair question, and one that I will comment by saying that when it comes to examples, templates, samples, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And what I mean by that is we like to leverage what is already particularly available out there in terms of the community. So, Kisan, as we have actually contributions from other practitioners, we've selected the best plays, the best templates, the best worksheets that are highly impactful and pragmatically able to use for the everyday practitioner. And the idea being, let's find the right ones that fit most situations, and that's the one we want to publish. There are plenty of templates out there that you can also always come to the M&A Science website and check it out and download. But the best ones that we found are the ones that we put in the book, because we find that those fit 8 out of 10 situations that most practitioners run into.
Cool. Thanks, John. All right. So John mentioned, I think the big component of the book, there's a lot of interviews. We had over 50 practitioners that we referenced through these qualitative interviews, most of which were published through the M&A Science podcast, but a good portion weren't. That's kind of where we have a lot of very much research focused interviews as well. But that was a nice, like John mentioned as well, to reference a whole series of subject matter experts. So it wasn't just based on a handful of practitioners' experience, but you have this wide range coming from a variety of different experience. Folks that have done this several times, where they stood up an M&A function, or folks that may have done it very, very recently and had a lot of the challenges fresh in mind. Here's an example with a quote from James here. I'm not going to read through the quote, but just give you an idea of how we pulled up insights from a subject matter expert and be able to correlate some of their experience into this book and fit it into where in the life cycle these sort of tips and tricks would fit into. And we also had Klint Kendrick contribute, who's a very experienced HR M&A integration practitioner who's worked in several Fortune 500 companies. And he's kind enough to share a video with us. So hopefully you can play this and it works well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Klint Kendrick, chair of the HR M&A Roundtable and author of 2 HR practitioners' guides for mergers and acquisitions. I wish I could join you in person, but right now I'm somewhere over the Pacific, enjoying my first international trip since before the pandemic. I was so excited to see this book go live. I just had to share a few thoughts about the amazing content between its covers. Before I start sharing about the book, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Kison and John. I met Kison several years ago and immediately recognized a kindred spirit. He's somebody passionate about doing M&A well. He's somebody who wants to give back to the community. And he's somebody who understands that M&A isn't complete just because the deal is signed and closed. He knows that driving deal value requires solid integration know-how. When I met John a few years after, I knew we had another voice sharing the same messages. Getting deals from sourcing to closing is challenging and important work. In most cases, you don't realize deal value until you've integrated the business. And integrating the business includes integrating the soft stuff, the people, leadership, and culture. Let me take a few minutes to share about how to stand up an M&A function. This book has hidden gems in every chapter, and there are a lot of things that I love about it. Here are my top three. First, Kison and John clearly show how the entire process from deal making through integration drive value for the acquirer. Second, Kison's interviewed so many movers and shakers in the M&A space that he has amazing stories from people who've been there. The book is full of relatable examples that drive the key points home. And third, Kison and John are all about actionable insight. There are multiple plays, including critical steps like working with deal sponsors, running effective kickoff meetings and status meetings, and of course, integration planning. Let me take a minute to highlight two of my favorite parts of how to stand up an M&A function. There's so much great content, it was hard to choose which sections were truly my favorites. So I went with what I learned the most from and what I think will make the biggest difference. Let's start with where I learned the most. Even though I've worked on more than 110 deals in my career, I seldom get involved pre-LOI. Most of my work is on the back end of the deal. That's why chapter 2, which discusses some of the foundational elements of setting up an overarching M&A practice, was so insightful. In that chapter, Kison and John share 10 steps for understanding the buy side, which I'll be adapting as I continue to evolve my current HR M&A practice. Because understanding the content in the first section is so valuable for those of us who get involved later in the deal, this book will become required reading for my teams in the future. The second area I'd like to highlight is the one thing that I think will unlock the most value in any deal, and that's retaining the talent. Consider for a moment the cost of replacing a salaried employee who's hired off the street runs right around 150% of that person's annual pay. With a median income of right around $70,000 for salaried employees, the cost of losing one of these skilled salaried employees is right around $100,000. As a person's skill level increases, so do their salary and replacement costs. Off-the-street employees who earn $200,000 or more generally cost 200% or more to replace, which means each highly compensated employee who leaves a firm will likely cost at least $400,000 to replace. Now let's factor in the M&A tax. Replacing an M&A hire will be even more expensive because you probably don't have people in-house familiar with the customers, familiar with the products, familiar with the technology, familiar with the processes, that really understand the secret sauce that you paid a premium for when you made the acquisition. It also doesn't include costs associated with losing customers or delaying product launches. These are just the costs of finding and training the replacement so you can get those customers back or keep your product launch on track. Kison and John have shared a lot of quotes and a play about employee retention that I think will produce value right off the bat. I'd like to close by applauding Kison and John for writing this amazing book. How to Stand Up an M&A Function does a great job of looking at the entire deal, end to end, and sharing the knowledge and capabilities required to truly drive deal value. This book's full of real-life examples and actionable plays, and it should be required reading for anybody working in the M&A space. Congratulations, Kison and John, on a job well.
That was a nice video. I don't know if you've seen that before, John, but that was the first time I've seen it.
First time for me. Clint's such a good friend, and he's so eloquent. He's just a great guy.
Yeah, I mean, those of you, we have a couple of his books listed there on the slide. I highly recommend him. He's very humble himself, but he's a really good author. I think both of his books apply pretty universally as well for any corp dev practitioner, especially understanding the HR component in M&A and some of those points you referenced about retention as well. All right. I think we're time for questions, and this is where it gets more fun because I'd rather keep this more conversational, answer some questions that we have, wide open, anything goes. I got one in Q&A. I don't know if anybody in our team is going to help moderate here, but I'll get this first one kicked off here. The book sounds extremely exciting. Are the offered frameworks and guidelines suitable for conducting M&A across cultures? Example, emerging markets, Scandinavia. Thank you. I would say yes, because it is a lot of fundamentals there. I don't think we got too specific around cross-border culture as a topic. I know those topics we have picked up in other content that we've published. But for the most part with this book, it is very foundational in terms of what are the key components and considerations when those early stages of standing up an M&A function.
Yeah, I'll pitch in too, Kisan, which is there are many parts of the book that actually use pragmatic advice that can span multiple cultures, since foundationally a lot of the processes are multicultural. So, for example, let's look at chapter 3.6, which talks about integration planning. When you do integration planning, there's a lot of fundamentals in there that are repetitive and can be used agnostic of culture. For example, you want to consider when do you bring in your integration team prior to due diligence or just ahead of due diligence so that they're involved in the process throughout. That's not specific to any one particular culture. It's just a really good practice to do. So we have plenty of those examples throughout the rest of the book that are non-cultural based. And we would love to hear about more of those that are cultural based and the feedback that you give us. That way we learn as well and we can contribute that back to the community. Back to you, Kisan.
Other questions? John's going to take the hard ones. I'm going to take the easy ones.
All right, I have a question. What are the top two challenges you see most commonly with people who try to set up an M&A function?
Top challenges that we see when people stand up an M&A function. I think the first is always the hiring component of it. You know, it's understanding what to look for in a hire. And I think it's considerations about your organization that are unique that may sway it in one direction or another. You know, it's always this, do we look at somebody internal that truly knows the business operations versus hiring external with someone that has M&A experience? And there are multiple factors to look at. It's not a one size fits all answer. And then I think it's how you build that workflow of doing deals and building the key components of what actually drives a successful deal. So I think one big, if I look at the key elements of what drives deal success, first and foremost is alignment about the end state. What ultimately are the organizations combining together going to achieve? And what bringing that, crystallize that vision and bring it to the forefront of the deal so that there's alignment between executives. I think this executive alignment should also, secondly, build around values of each respected organization. And oftentimes organizations use similar sounding buzzwords, but to have discussions that dive deeper into that to help understand the respected organization's culture, way of doing things, leadership styles and approaches can really help unlock a lot upfront in the deal to better understand how the organizations are going to come together. I think the other third piece would be the go-to-market itself, is really shaping an outline of a go-to-market early as possible, ideally even pre-LOI, to get, again, that alignment with the other leadership team. How does each organization exist to serve their customers? And what is that going to look like combined? You know, can there be an exercise to just map that customer journey to get a sense of what that go-to-market is going to evolve into? And then the fourth would be, as you progress into diligence, is building out this parallel track into how you are planning for integration while you're doing diligence. I think it's a thing that often doesn't come together as jointly as it can. And then you have a siloed effort with integration, looking to play catch up, and oftentimes doing a lot of redundant work, really rediligencing the deal again, that causes delays and may not have as comprehensive of a plan as they come time to day one and rubber hits the road. You need to really execute an integration. And the fifth element is a model to introduce a form of reverse diligence, where there's so much planning on the acquirer side and how the company is going to be integrated, but from the acquiree side, helping them understand what the business of the acquirer looks like, what are their different business lines, how are they going to fit into it, and really bringing them in as part of that journey to keep them engaged and keeping that partnership aligned so they work better together. And those are the key components when you really look at what drives an M&A function to be successful, and how do you start planning and building that out into your system as you build it. I didn't say anything,
Thanks.
John.
Not much left for me to say. You covered a lot there. I'll complement your first statement, which is on talent. We have in chapter 1 a lot of information about the type of person you want to spearhead corporate development. If it is your very first hire and your very first effort in building corporate development. So I'll complement Kison's point on that. But for me, the second most complicated or most challenging idea behind a corporate development team is having the CEO know when that he or she needs one. And that is a point at which I find to be more strategic than maybe some of the details of the book talk about the practicum of how to set up a corporate development function. But imagine like when you need one, right? When should a first-time CEO or first-time corporate development team need to buy this book, right? I think that is fundamentally as important question as the how. And so this book should not just be about your everyday corporate development practitioner or your everyday integration practitioner. It should actually be in the hands of some of the first-time CEOs who are looking to do their first-time transaction. So get this in their hands ahead of time so that they know what are the let's call it the pitfalls or the best paths forward for them as they build a function. Not wait until your board tells you that you have to go do an acquisition, right, to help grow. Rather, let's think about putting M&A as part of your corporate strategy, and in so doing, understanding what's the right way to put together a team and develop that team so they're successful with their first acquisition. So, back to you, Elise.
Thanks. That was a great response. And John, I actually have a question directly for you. But first, it looks like we have another Q&A from the audience. So let's prioritize that one. I can read it and then I'll let you guys respond. So having a great picture of the fundamentals in the M&A process, how do you think the functions could be replaced or substituted? Oh, this is interesting, with AI programs to make the process more effective. And what functions do you think will never be replaced with AI? Wow, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's one to think about here. I will. Okay, here's where I do not think AI will replace a certain M&A function, and that is when you're dealing with people. People themselves, the talent side of an acquisition, the change side of an acquisition, does still demand that people be involved, whether it be for just the emotional support required for going through a transaction, or just the high level of EQ that's required by leadership to make sure that both the parent and the newly acquired company come together with a good culture. Those are things that I don't think a standard deep learning model can apply and can find a solution for. So that's number one. But there are places where AI does make sense. So, for example, when you're going through due diligence, how many times have, let's say, different bankers or different buyers asked for the exact same piece of information that you've already provided in your data room? Instead of having to reply, having a human reply, you could certainly have artificial intelligence find the heuristics of that question, find the proper documentation that could apply, and then send them a response. Right? It cuts down the cycles that are necessary by a human. Also, it increases the expediency of the responses back to the buyer and the banker, which helps again compress the amount of time. Because as you know, time is a killer of all deals. So the sooner that you can get responses back, the higher probability that your deal will close successfully. Kison, how about you? Any thoughts?
I agree. Those are good use cases. I do have this reality check. Our industry, M&A, doesn't quite move as fast as we see areas like sales and marketing, the way they'll adopt to AI technology. I think our industry still got about a 5-10 year lag, so it's something to be mindful of. But I think I agree on some of those use cases to be able to synthesize information, process it faster, be more diligent. We're already seeing some things starting to shape in the contract analysis side of looking at the whole series of similar looking contracts and identifying where the unique clauses to be able to review them faster. They just will get easier to use over time so that any practitioner could use it. But I think the current state is still a lot of this activity done in Excel, and it's one, can you get into a platform to use some of this AI? And then I think AI itself is evolving quickly, where we're seeing a lot of these high-powered models that are actively talked about that are in a very public context, because there's a lot of horsepower it takes to drive that kind of AI technology. So seeing how it can evolve into these use cases for the very private, sensitive information, and to be able to cater to that kind of use case while, using it mindful of the sensitivity of the information being processed, so it's not going into some public output. So yeah, I think overall very bullish on it, but reality, I think we got some time before we start seeing some wide adoption in the industry. It just tends to move a lot slower than other industries. But I don't know, maybe John's gonna change all that.
Well, I will say one thing though, Elise. I'm not so sure virtual reality or augmented reality works with M&A yet, but maybe that'll be something that's 10 years down the road.
I was gonna say you could use like Chat GPT to make like a project name instead of like Project Squirrel or something. You get a creative name using AI.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I like that idea. Actually, maybe that'll help me be more creative with my project names, right, Julia?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Oof, I was just about to ask another question, but we got another one from the audience. So this one is asking, okay, so this is from first person perspective. If I had a choice, would I pick my first corporate development hire to be somebody with a lot of M&A experience, but not from my industry, or someone well connected in my industry, but with not a lot of M&A experience?
We should make the audience vote on this one, Elise. This would be a fun one to see the bars go across to see which one wins.
Let me see if I can make a poll really quick, actually. Oh, I don't think I have access to polling right now, but we could
Okay,
do
next
like
time.
a raise of hands or something.
Yeah, it's a big variable one, in my opinion, because I think what's unique when you look at organizations is their way the deals are sourced. You know, sometimes I've seen industries that are heavily banked, and your relationships with the bankers are ultimately what drive your deal flow. You network with the key 3 to 5 bankers in that space, and you're going to see most of the deal flow coming in. We've seen others where corporate development drives that deal flow in a very proprietary way. They're out and about, they're meeting people, shaking hands, and they're building these relationships that turn into the deal opportunities. We've seen other functions where they rely on the internal network for them to be connected with the business unit leaders, connected to project management, product managers, and being able to get inside their eyes and ears and help them identify those opportunities, or maybe they identify them, but for them to be able to move it through a process and again get those deals done. Those are very different situations, and they was where you're going to have a variable in that consideration, knowing where your deal flow comes from to make sure you get a person with that right fit, because then that industry side may actually be of more value because they can focus on those relationships to get them through the process. But if it really requires building out this origination model from scratch, you may want to get somebody with M&A experience that knows how to do that, that can really set a process up, go out and build an origination model. So really different depending on how the industry plays the current space with the current opportunities that they're identifying and where they're coming from.
Yeah, Kison, I would say the book doesn't actually tell you the answer to that one. So that's a very good question, because we feel that it really depends, right? And I apologize for being a bit, unpersuasive in this argument, but what it really boils down to, though, is the ability for your corporate development team to have the proper support in order to do their job. So if you are, let's say, heavily leaning towards finding someone who's more of an M&A practitioner, less about the industry, well, that's fine. I think then what you have to do is you have to build a review board or a steering committee below that individual that makes up, for example, if you're in pharma, right, a key scientists who are involved in that process of reviewing what deals are coming in. That's really important. You need to have that support structure. But then let's say you're leaning on finding an internal person who's got a great industry experience, but not a ton of M&A. Well, guess what? Your board, your CEO, your other executives, they might have a network of people who, or bankers, for example, who they can leverage and get to know the person that you put into that role, who's more of a industry expert. So I guess what I'm trying to say is building a corporate development function is not a silo in itself. Building a corporate development function means that there are plenty of moving parts that allow you to solve for that particular situation that you're in. And there's so many variations of it that I think it's just best to determine what's important from your corporate strategic plan, and then find out what type of person you need in that role, and then build a support structure below them in order for that person to be successful. That's the answer that I would give.
Wow, that was a really great answer. Thanks, you guys. But I do have more questions, and this one's for you, John, in particular, tapping into your integration experience. Do you have any advice for building good relationships with SMEs or subject matter experts?
Oh, of course, of course. I think the very first thing is find out who they are. Find out those individuals that are the ones that you can go to, because let's say you don't know accounts payable very well, or you don't know a product very well. So go find those folks. I mean, I'll be honest with you, at least every time I walk down the hallway, when I'm visiting another department, people just scatter because they think, oh my gosh, Judd's coming down the hallway. He's going to ask for our time, right? He's bought another company, so let's avoid him as much as possible. Well, I joke, right? But there is some truth to that. But what that also means is that if I'm going to beeline it to somebody who I do need time from, then that individual is someone I trust, maybe I've worked with before, or has a great reputation in the company, that knows what they're doing, and they can, of course, service this acquisition in the proper way. So what that means is I have to not only leverage my own network of people who I interact with at the water cooler, or we have lunches together, but also every once in a while pinging other executives in the company to determine who are the top players that might be a key person to put into an integration. So working on integration is as much about the mechanics of successfully delivering a merger or divestiture, as much as it is about building the right relationships with people. And I'll go back to my prior statement, at least, which is I don't think AI can do that. I don't think AI can replace the relationships you build with people, because that is where you find the gems, the folks who are going to really be the rising stars that participate during an acquisition or divestiture. And they're the ones that you want to go to every time. But in order to do that, you got to find out who they are. And that takes people skills. And people skills, I don't think AI can solve for just yet. So that's where I'd say, Elise, is go find out people, go walk the hallways. I know it's tough in this environment, but sometimes a quick virtual Zoom meeting for 5 minutes to introduce yourself to someone, that goes a long way. So it's about that personal touch. It's about reaching through the screen to say hello to somebody who you think is a top player.
Well, that was really helpful, especially adding in the touch about the challenges or hurdles of, the virtual, or I should rather say hybrid world that we're working in now. Great. Hope you guys have stamina for a few more questions. I just have a few more here. Let's see. Okay, so if you had the budget to hire just one full-time employee for integration, where would you start and what role would you prioritize?
That's a John question.
Okay, for integration, wow. My brain is spinning on this one because I can almost debate all the different roles that somebody could play. I would say the first one would be if you have the budget and you need to find somebody within the next 60 days, you probably want to go find somebody within the company first, which is somebody who doesn't have to be, let's say, like a project manager or a program manager, but someone who has a good enough reputation and strength of a network in the company that would be able to pull resources as needed or help find out information as needed in a very fast, expedient way. That's the type of person that I would normally look for, because the reputation that they have, the network that they have, is certainly worth their weight in gold, if not more, in the way that you would move through the answers and the questions that are needed in order to start to do integration planning, and or actually when you are integration itself. And I'll use one example, Elise, which is when I worked for on a deal, it was called Project Tokyo, and I can't tell you the company, but what I can say is that it was an international acquisition. It was more of an acqui-hire acquisition, and I did have a budget actually to hire one person. And normally, what I would have done is, being the parent company, I would have looked for somebody in my own ranks. Actually, I didn't do that. I went to the seller company or the target company and I found somebody there. The reason is because it being an acqui-hire, it was much easier for me to connect and build a relationship with somebody already on the target company who had the connections to all the different departments that were being folded into our parent company. It was more efficient for me to do it that way, but actually it was sort of an unintended consequence, because in some ways, when I was looking within the hallways of my parent company, I didn't find anybody that was the right fit, but I did find somebody who was at the target company a much better fit. So, being what it was, circumstance being what it was, it actually worked out in my benefit. But what I want to tell the audience is, look beyond the hallways of your own company. Look at the other ways, or look at the other avenues that you have, which is either somebody at the seller or at the target company, or it could be a consultancy that maybe somebody has used and they've already built those connections with the right departments. So never consider options out. I mean, never forget that there are options out there when you maybe not finding the right person within your own department or within your own company.
Nice. I like how that was kind of related to the earlier question we had about, the classic internal or external hiring when it comes to building out your corp dev team. I think we just have one more question, which is kind of on the same strain, about if you have limited resources, say you're just one person, what would be the best way to address integration planning? So kind of like, how does a one-man show approach the complexity of integration?
At least I think that one's for me. And I would say that if you're struggling as one individual who is head of corporate development, and you are not only doing a lot of the origination and a lot of negotiation, but then you're also having to do integration, one of the best things I would offer is, please call us. I am more than happy to help anybody who is struggling with integration, how to figure out how to properly plan for it. Or I would recommend go to chapter 3 of the book. There's a lot about it in there. And there are templates in there, by the way, as well. But additionally, just as a service to the community, if you have questions around that, we're here to help. We think that this is not just about what's written in black and white, but it's also about how do we serve each other? Because if we're not serving each other, then who's going to help each other, right? So if we build a community, we build a strong community, then everybody should be able to answer those questions as we go forward, and we start to create this movement around many, many more practitioners knowing the answer to those type of questions. Kison, what do you think?
I agree. You're an integration guru. I'm the deal guy. I get to LOI sign to get to close and I'm out. That was the fun part about collaborating with you on this book, is like very unique backgrounds, but just for context, I spent 10 years doing M&A advisory. A lot of my transactions were lower middle market, like 20 million to 200 million. And I did both buy and sell side representation. But once deal was closed, I was out, so a lot of front end experience in the deal. Where John, on the other hand, had a more of a corporate focused background, working on small and large scale integrations upwards in the multi-billions of dollar transaction value. So it's always fun to banter a little bit between our backgrounds.
But it's about helping each other, right, Kison? I think the beauty of what you just said is that you and I work together so well because your experience has served one part of the life cycle. My experience has served the other part of the life cycle. Together, we put together this reference guide for folks, and I don't think it should stop with us. I think it should continue on. There should be more who contribute to maybe version 2 of the book, or just relatively contribute to the community. It's about building and making sure that each of us learns more and more from each other every day, because the myriad of experiences out there, it's so colorful. There's just a lot of amazing ways that people get things done. And I feel that we should all share because, again, there's just a lot of value that we can all get by teaching each other.
Hey, I know we're close to wrapping up here. John, do you want to maybe plug in what the new 2023 project you're working on?
Of course. Well, ladies and gentlemen, one of the initiatives that we have here at M&A Science is continuous improvement. And in so doing, we are obviously honored to release this book to you, but also we are building what is called the Agile M&A Integration Curriculum. What this allows us to do is share with you many more of the practical approaches that we have to take some of the agile principles that came out of software development, how to take some of those principles and weave them in or complement them into your current methodologies so that you have a iterative, flexible approach to doing integration. We, through this course, will share with you not only the practical ways to go about it, but also the methods, the thoughts, and the ideas on how to embrace those principles. So Kison, thank you for the opportunity to mention it. It will be coming out here in the first quarter, where we'll be releasing several of the first courses along the curriculum. And then throughout the rest of 2023, we will start to evolve more and more the courses that we release, as well as advancing the knowledge as well. There will be plenty of courses for everyone to take. We are, in fact, going to be keeping the courses very succinct so that you can get through them very quickly. The idea being, again, to complement your knowledge with these agile principles into the methodology that you already have today.
Thanks, John. I think that's a wrap. I know we've got a good number of folks that are still with us. I want to say thank you. And I don't know, this is where we give away stuff. We're giving away copies of the book.
Yeah, we did have a raffle winner that we're going to announce on LinkedIn right after this ends. But if you're interested in grabbing a free copy, we'll send out a link to all of the attendees in a follow-up email as well after this event.
We're going to hook you up. Thanks you for just taking the time. We appreciate it. And obviously want to share some of this project we spent about a year working on, and we'd love to get the feedback and just keep growing our community here and help each other shape up and get sharper at doing M&A. I think that's a wrap. We got one question in there. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, thank you. That's a wrap, everybody. Here's to the deal.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.